Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about violence in video games and how it's affecting the youth of today, and how it's all of these accusations and things are complete bollocks. Ultimately, again, highlighted by the recent shooting in Florida that has blown up and caused my gun control video, caused my cultural change video and managing cultural change video, and so on and so forth. Now we're on to the topic of video games, and obviously you guys know that I'm very much a proponent of the positive effects of video games, where they can be a learning experience. They are a good way to channel various other emotions and things that you have into something more constructive. They are a social interaction. They are a huge industry that now beats out Hollywood fairly regularly in terms of just money. And so, as a result, you know, it's a big industry. You've got a lot of people getting more and more into it. It has a plethora of positive effects that I've covered in other videos. But now we've got this case of, for instance, Trump saying, and I quote, "I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts." And now, firstly, no, it's not, and we'll get into why in a minute. But also, who is telling you this? Other people your age who have no idea what a video game is or how it even works. The same people that brought this whole thing up for things like the Columbine massacres ages and ages and ages ago. You know, it's a case of going, hold the phone. No, none of these things can really be attributed, and there's no evidence for it. So one of the first most interesting commentaries I've seen on this is has come out of a few different places, but one that stands out was when I found it in the UK's Business Insider, where they happily highlight the fact that whilst this is very, very interesting that he would instantly jump to that rather than some of the other various issues around, you know, firearms that can be statistically demonstrated. Even though the United States doesn't allow for gun-related violence to be studied by the CDC, and so even the link to video games can't be kind of monitored, which is, suffice it to say, unfortunate. We have a lot of other information in regards to the impact. But the first thing that stands out is that, as they say in Business Insider UK, the overall argument, simple reason, makes no sense. And there's a reason why it doesn't make any sense, and that is the same video games played in the US are played worldwide. However, the level of gun violence is exponentially higher in the US than in other countries. I addressed the statistical differences in my video that I did on gun control a little while ago, but then let's take a look at more of the information and evidence around this, shall we? So, who have we got that's actually pointing out that there's no link between the two? Well, firstly, you've got the American Supreme Court, who actually quite adequately pointed out that the suggestion that the player participates in the violent action on screen and determines the outcome of additional violence is unpersuasive. Then, from the American Psychological Association 2015 in-depth study, they saw a link between increased aggression, but not an increase in regards to violence, delinquency, or other such issues. Why? Well, who'd have thought if you're playing a game, you're going to be more aggressive, you're going to be more assertive in your environment, right? The same way that someone who's playing a game of football or rugby or any other like sport-focused game is going to be interacting with that environment in a competitive and aggressive fashion. Just because it's aggressive does not mean violence. As was stated by the APA, all violence is aggression, but not all aggression is violence. This distinction is important for understanding this research literature, for considering the implications of the research, and for interpreting popular press accounts of the research and its applicability to societal events. And so, yes, if you're going to be playing a game, then there's a lose condition and you don't want to lose. So you're going to be more aggressive in regards to trying to get hold of that win state. You're not going to just sit around and not do anything. So being aggressive, being assertive within a game environment is kind of to be expected as much as you would see it on a football field or a rugby field or a hockey pitch or wherever. You know, you expect to see that level of aggression, of forcefulness in pursuit of a goal increase. You know, that's somewhat straightforward, isn't it? But then you had the University of York coming up with a set of studies to determine whether or not people are confusing stuff from a game, an interactive experience. Again, I've talked about this in regards to other games as well, where it was, oh, games are hurting young people. But here's the thing. Here, they're not just going, is there, where I was pointing out that, yes, they're essentially cartoons. Children can tell the difference between cartoons and reality. They're going to be able to tell the difference between a cartoony video game or a non-realistic video game and reality. In this instance, the studies that the University of York did demonstrated how a realistic environment in a video game and then realistic interactions with aspects of that environment in the real world don't add up. They don't affect one another. So they did one on reaction time, where they focused on the kids playing these, or individuals playing these games, which then they would go, if we were expecting people to be primed, if players are primed through immersing themselves in the concepts of the game, they should be able to categorize the objects associated with the game more quickly in the real world once the game is concluded. Across the two games that we used, we didn't find this to be the case. Participants who played a car game were no quicker at categorizing vehicle images, and indeed, in some cases, their reaction time was significantly slower. So there's no direct interaction between being drawn towards stuff in regards to your just straight up reaction, your attentiveness towards a thing. In regards to confusions with realism, they say that what did they do for this one? They played, I think they played two other games again. Doesn't actually say. How odd. There are several experiments looking at what they said. The Dr. Zendel, who is the person who was looking into the whole thing, there are several experiments looking at graphic realism in video games, but they have returned mixed results. There are, however, other ways that violent games can be realistic besides looking like the real world, such as the way characters behave. For example, our experiment looked at the use of ragdoll physics in game design, which creates characters that move and react in the same way that they would in real life. Again, part of me thinks this doctor isn't necessarily a gamer. Many of you guys will have seen all the meme videos, and many of you guys will have played games where the ragdoll physics is by no means realistic. Human characters are modelled on the movement of a human skeleton and how the skeleton would fall if it was injured. And so, right, yeah, okay, they compared between a game with ragdoll physics and a game without ragdoll physics in a combat environment, and then they had a follow-up using a word fragment completion task, which basically you've got the different words broken down and used for recognition and kind of pulling things up, and they were expected to find that more violent associations would be chosen for those who had played the game that employed more realistic behaviors, because obviously you're actually seeing not just a cartoon explosion or something when people with the characters dying or just them falling over in a comedic fashion. You would expect them to be more immersed in the violent aspects of it, and yet then when they actually compared it overall, they said, we found that the priming of violent concepts as measured by how many violent concepts appeared in the word fragment completion task was basically undetectable. There was no difference in priming between the game that employed ragdoll physics and the game that didn't, as well as no significant difference between the games that used real and unreal soldier tactics. The findings suggest that there is no link between the kinds of realism in games and the effect that games have, are commonly thought to have on players. And then they go into saying, yes, we do need to do further study into other aspects of potential realism. Sound design, for instance, I would imagine would be one of them. But then also, they've said that one of the other limitations was that they used individuals that were older, not the youngest of young children, who are often being highlighted in this. And as a result, there's the various kind of questions still around that on the younger end. However, then we've also got other individuals highlighting stuff. For instance, we've got the University of Stetson University in Florida saying it's hard to attribute to video games to any kind of violence in society. We are not able to find any evidence to support this idea. And then we've also got Whitney DeCamp, a professor of sociology at Western Michigan University, who says the relationship between video games and violent behavior is insignificant and trivial. And then we've got again and again and again this entire set of things that is continued to be highlighted and gone back to, and we've got more and more and more evidence, and yet the actual counter evidence to the case, where it would be a case of going, well, look, no, actually these are the causes of the gun violence in your country, which would probably be generated by the CDC, as I've said before, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They are actually prevented from looking into this, including the effects of video games on this kind of violence, by a piece of legislation introduced 22 years ago called the Dickey Amendment, which prevents the CDC from funding any kind of gun-related research or use money to advocate or promote gun control. So in other words, even though this is about video games, it's the link to violence that has highlighted it, and so they still can't even investigate. They can't come up with the official overarching piece of research recognised, funded and developed by the government to look into this, both for gamers, both for the people who want gun control, the people who don't want gun control, whoever. That certainty, that evidence worked entirely out by the people within their own country. They aren't able to do it because of a 22-year-old piece of legislation that makes no damn sense. And so, as a result, though, there is another issue that I want to talk about, and that is in regards to the parents who are rallying behind this and going, yes, gun, all of these things, video games are terrible, we can't allow them to do stuff. And one game that kind of highlighted this was the recent situation where you had a kid spending a huge amount of cash on Fortnite, and apparently it's such a terrible thing, and it's so ridiculous because it's a case of them going, we want this Fortnite game being kind of dealt with. It's becoming a more and more... Oh, we've got an advert. There we go. Let's get rid of that, please. But we've got a more and more addictive experience that's being thrown out to people, and they're getting invested in it. And it looks like a Pixar cartoon, and it's doing all of these things, and it's got a 12 certificate, but it's got these microtransactions. People are spending hours and hours on it. It's so terrible. And it's like, hold on. So it's a 12 certificate, and apparently this is impacting young people, including apparently, I believe it was a 10-year-old boy who was highlighted on This Morning, a kind of daytime TV show in the UK with Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield as the presenters. And it firstly, 12 certificate, 12 plus, in theory means that it shouldn't be played by a 10-year-old. However, I'm not certain if it follows the same rules overall as licensed products at 12A, because 12A films can be seen by someone younger with the supervision of an adult. So there's that. But something tells me that the mother that was complaining, someone called Suzanne something, said that I very much doubt that she went and sat and supervised this child whilst he was playing, and it's very troubling, because not only are we blaming kind of violence on video games now, but we're also bad parents who just aren't supervising their children, and who aren't adhering to licensing laws and stuff like that. Firstly, they've got no reprisal. They're not going to get their wrists slapped for essentially providing a child a game when they're underage, below the age restriction. And it could be because this is a 12 certificate game. It's a kind of 12A equivalent kind of thing, so it might be a bit more grey on that. But again, here's the thing that stands out. If you're aware of how games work, if you invest yourself in your child's hobbies, if you take interest in their life, and if you parent them well, teach them the lessons that they need to be taught, then you don't have the problems that you're describing. And you can ask, she was asking for a higher age certificate on this 12 certificate game, and it's already a 12 certificate, and she was letting her 10-year-old play it. Would the higher age certificate make a difference if it was an 18 and you provided it to a 10-year-old? Would that make it all such a different matter? I don't think so. Learn to be a better parent, and then you can kind of follow through on this. And it's a case of, we've seen kids spending huge amounts of money on it, by remembering. God damn it! Okay, it's another advert on this article that I'm reading from, but it's not come up. But anyway, you've got a huge number of people playing it across various different platforms. You've got a lot of money going into it, and you do have those shitty kids that are going to remember people's passwords when their parents have decided that, yes, okay, you can buy something, but only once. And they're going to remember passwords, they're going to keep an eye on things. Guess what? Supervise your kids better. Go and make sure that your money is better checked, better taken care of. Just because this kid is kind of invested in the game and wants to tackle other stuff, you cannot scapegoat the game that you potentially got them. Or at the very least, if they're playing the free-to-play Battle Royale version of the game, then that's something that they've downloaded privately, free on their PC. Sure, but why didn't you know about it? And if you do know about it, as is suggested here, then why didn't you do some more about it? It's such a easy scapegoat for everybody. If it's violence, if it's children's behaviour, if it's anything else, it's never their fault. It's not the government's fault that they're crappy legislation allows people to go and murder each other. It's not the parents' fault that their kids are shitty little children that have been raised poorly. You know, in my view, when I have kids, if I have kids, I would very much love to play games with my kids. It would allow me, as a parent, potentially grandparent, throughout the rest of my days, to then interact with my children and my grandchildren and whoever else, wherever they are on Earth. On top of that, when it comes to raising kids in the house, get them a PC first, not a crappy console. Firstly, PC Master Race. But secondly, consoles, they don't teach you anything. They're a lot more difficult for a parent to potentially handle, and especially if a child works out how to turn off things like parental locks and stuff on them, then they can do it without you noticing. PC, you've got a lot more software options, you've got a lot more options of things you can do, including work lockouts and things like that you can get for corporate kind of level work lockout programs, you know, for enforced breaks, that you can literally just go and you can force. As a result, though, you have to force your kid to manage their time. A PC then also allows them to learn how to touch type. It allows them to learn how software works, because obviously some games, you can get them onto your hard drive and they just won't work. So you need to work out how they work, what requirements they have, how you can make it work. You can teach your kids so much more through it. If you've got siblings, you know, a pair of kids that are brothers and sisters and whatever else, if you've got maybe 2 of them or whatever, get them one machine. Teach them how to share. Teach them about time management, fairness, sharing. Learn to appreciate someone else's success in the game. Learn how to help each other through the game. Get co-op games for them so they can learn to work together and cooperate and do well for each other as well as but for themselves. There is so much more that you can do and teach and handle in that way, but consoles are marketed to those people who aren't aware of these things, and it's just another toy. Great. Don't be taken in by that. Educate yourself. Video games are just another form of art medium. We have seen this happen with comic books, with role-playing games, with movies, with music. We have seen it happen time and time again where there is a thing that gets scapegoated and it is easy to scapegoat. Why is video games continuing to come back again and again and again and again as this scapegoat? Simple. It is one of the fastest developing and evolving entertainment media on the planet. And as a result, it is always scary because the next new thing is always going to be different. The next new thing is always going to be scary. The next new thing is always going to be something that those who aren't involved in it aren't going to be able to keep track of. It is no surprise to me that Donald Trump doesn't know what's going on. But again, this isn't an excuse for him to blame them for the violence in his country. That's happening on his watch as well, I would point out. So it's on him to do something about. But also, it's not on parents to be able to have the ability to blame this, to blame games for their children being little shits. It's a fairly straightforward thing. If your child's an arsehole, that's probably because you made them an arsehole. Or at the very least, you didn't help them not be one. So when it comes down to this, and kids being crappy, and this mother saying that they have to spend so much time changing the Wi-Fi password. Why? The Wi-Fi password takes 2 seconds to change. That demonstrates your level of competence, and it's minimal. And so you definitely don't know what your kid is doing. If you need to keep changing your Wi-Fi password again and again and again, then that just shows that it's not working, right? If you continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result each time, guess what? You're not. That's insanity. Literally insanity. So, you know, if her kid is being a pain in the arse, she needs to look at the way she's handling, managing, and possibly even communicating and treating her kid, including buying him things that are an age limit too high for him. Maybe be a little stricter. It might look like a cartoon. Fine. Why don't you play the game first and see what it's like? Just a thought. You know, when you're watching movies and you're like, oh well, that seems okay for your kid. You should probably, you know, you sit down and watch the movie first. If you get a PG film, parental guidance, you sit down and watch the movie before you show it to a child who might be a bit sensitive to some of the stuff in the movie, right? You see it first and then offer the media up to them. You don't just throw it at them. And if you do, that's part of the problem, right? Or at the very least, you watch it with them, you play it with them, you supervise them whilst they are viewing the thing that might cause an issue. If you're that worried about games, be stricter with your child, supervise them better, deal with them on a more intelligent adult level where you can actually interact with them, knowing what they're talking about and them knowing what you're talking about. And again, that also comes back to the violence issue. If you want to talk about violence in video games, by all means. If you want to talk about how it affects real world violence, firstly, there's nothing to support it. Secondly, you need to have an intelligent conversation about it, which is something that doesn't come along with just scapegoating it and complaining. Anyway, guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know that an awful lot of you guys are here because of a particularly bloody and graphic video game, which is Conan Exiles. Which, again, just because I play it doesn't mean I instantly want to go and build a mighty fortress and fire myself into the sky with a trebuchet, as much as that's one of my favourite things to do in the game by itself. So, you know, there's definitely a disconnect between the stupid shit that keeps being said, the silly scapegoating, and then what we actually do when we play. We test things, we learn things, we, sometimes dominate other people, we make friends, we do all of this other stuff, we learn things, it improves our planning, our reaction times, our spatial awareness, our various forms of goal achievement kind of strategies. It teaches us things within the game and without the game. It can improve our social skills. You know, it can do all of these other things, but one thing that it can't do is directly force us into being more violent, aggressive, and potentially deadly people. So otherwise, guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, especially if you're a parent. If you're a parent and you have kids and you play games, what are your thoughts on your children playing? How do you manage it? How do you handle it? These parents that have been scapegoating games, do you sit with me going, well, you just need to better understand and better kind of handle your kids? Or do you feel that you can jump beyond that? Obviously, as and when and if I have children, then I'll be able to demonstrate this firsthand and be able to go, look, this is how we deal with it. It's not that difficult. You just need to think a little bit and adhere to some of the laws and some of the suggestions that are already out there, maybe, just a little bit. But either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts, guys. And thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the video later. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video later. Take care.